Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Getting to Better Together, our podcast mini-series sponsored by the Centre for International Development, Social Entrepreneurship and Leadership, CIDSL, of the University of the Sunshine Coast. I'm your host, Richard Borden. Before proceeding, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. It's approaching a quarter of a century since Ernest Boyer, the president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in the United States, made both a disturbing admission and a call for transformative change in an address to an academic forum in October 1995. It seems to me, he stated, that for the first time in nearly half a century, institutions of higher learning, and he was referring of course to those in the United States, are not collectively caught up in some urgent central issue, an endeavour that was national, akin to placing a man on the moon, for instance, or countering the nuclear threat of the then Soviet Union. Still, he continued, our outstanding universities and colleges remain, in my opinion, among the greatest sources of hope for intellectual and civic progress in this country. I'm convinced that for this hope to be fulfilled, the Academy must become a more vigorous partner in the search for answers to our most pressing social, civic, economic and moral problems, and must reaffirm its historic commitment to what I have chosen to call the scholarship of engagement. Tragically, before he was able to further elaborate on that vital theme, Boyer was to die of a heart attack within a few short months of that talk. Questions about how university academics would actually involve themselves in activities pretty far removed from their accustomed work practices as teachers and researchers were left hanging. And so too were guidelines for addressing issues that are not social or civic or economic or moral problems, but all of these combined into complex situations where the search for betterment is more appropriate than the quest for solutions to relatively straightforward problems. And furthermore, these quests would involve academics in genuine participative partnerships with communities, organisations, businesses, faith institutions, charities, and even individual citizens in civil society. These would be conversations that would inform social action for change for the better. As regular contributors to our podcast will know, it was Boyer's call for universities to engage more comprehensively with civil society in addressing the pressing issues of the day that provided the motivation for this podcast series of Getting to Better Together. Over the past 50 episodes or so, we've explored such critical contemporary global challenges as climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. National issues such as the complexities of the natural and social economic impacts of coal mining in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and the difficulties associated with potentially changing the Constitution to formally recognise the voice of Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples. We've had conversations with senior policymakers from Nepal and PNG, as well as those here at home. We've sought to expand understandings of matters related to education, to local and national politics, to social entrepreneurship, to futures thinking, social conscience, collective and individual worldviews, and to matters related to ethics and moral concerns, including human rights and societal obligations. While many of the conversations with our guests have assumed a somewhat abstract nature, a sense of the theoretical, even philosophical, rather than a down-to-earth practicality, all have been born of the practical lived experiences of each individual that we have interviewed. Our thrust has been to explore the nature and significance of the pressing problems of the day, with less emphasis on actual examples of initiatives by universities that illustrate the type of institutional community engagement that Boyer envisaged. It is precisely to this latter issue that we turn our attention in today's episode. The Thomson Institute at the University of the Sunshine Coast is a world-class hub for research, teaching and clinical services for Australia's most pressing mental health issues. In addition, however, it's also involved in award-winning initiatives that are set very clearly within the context of Boyer's community engagement vision. The Alliance for Suicide Prevention was established by the Institute in 2019 as a strategic framework to address the Sunshine Coast's, the region of the coast, alarming suicide rate, which was 9.1% higher than the national average. This ambitious program is centred on addressing a complex social issue that involves the Institute reaching beyond its conventional research and teaching activities and its traditional community service frameworks to access, inform and engage community partners across broad industry sectors. My guest today, Mervat Quirk, is playing a leading role in this vital initiative. Welcome, Mervat.
Thanks, Richard.
Mervat's been the manager of strategic partnerships and community engagement and development at this university since July in 2018. Her brief includes building strong stakeholder partnerships through the development, delivery and evaluation of engagement strategies, as well as promoting a collaborative voice to champion issues of critical importance to the region. Let me start by asking you the motivation for the launch of the Institute's project in suicide motivation, and perhaps to comment on the developments since its establishment just 4 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Richard. Fantastic introduction. Thank you for providing that little bit of an insight as well. I think that the Institute itself has been, its whole mission has been around recovery, and its whole mission has been around the aspects of actually providing core research areas in which we know are impacting people's everyday and their challenges. So I know that initially back in 2018 there was 2 areas in which the Thomson Institute was working with the Department of Health on, and they were youth mental health and suicide prevention. Okay. And suicide prevention had been identified, as you shared, that the Sunshine Coast was a region that was heavily impacted. We lose more than 1 person a week to suicide here on the Sunshine Coast.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And it has increased a little since COVID in 2022, also increased, unfortunately.
Wow.
So,
and the national figure is something like 8 die every day by suicide?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
So 1 out of 8?
Yeah, so we are a region, I think our population sits at about 398,000 at the moment. And Queensland itself, is not as big as a state as Victoria, but our stats are higher than Victoria.
Wow.
And we're a lot more regional, so there's different contributing factors and variables to situations. But I guess the Alliance was formed based on tackling that challenge itself. And it was one that we knew, working within a community like the Sunshine Coast community, which is a compassionate, supportive, resilient community. We knew that that's something that we could create here and provide that support and really encourage the hearts of our community to be able to be part of something that, was impacting them.
Has research revealed any reason why it should be so much higher here?
There's a number of, variables that...
Sure, complex.
But I know that the things that I hear, again, I'm not a researcher, but things that I do hear from our researchers and our professors around, we do have a high return serviceman population here on the Sunshine Coast. We also have a region in which, whilst we're very, connected, but I guess in regards to how we operate, we're not as connected as other regions as well. So that social connection and that ability to really formulate relationships and have that support network. A lot of people do transition to the Sunshine Coast for that lifestyle, and I don't know whether that, connection stays. They leave their families behind. They leave their loved ones, to come to, lifestyle change, and I don't think it always operates in the way in which.
So how do you go about doing what it is that you do?
Yeah, I think when we look at the subject of suicide prevention, and you look at suicide itself, it's something that's not an easy discussion to have with people.
No.
There's still a lot of stigma that sits around, mental health and, how people relate to having an open discussion or talking about the subject itself. So we knew that we had to create a narrative that people could see that they were part of a recovery of a challenge that was beyond anyone, really, when we think about the impact it has. With every suicide, what we know is more than 120 people are impacted from every one suicide.
Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So we know that from, you wouldn't have to look too far to not know someone who's been impacted by the loss of someone. So, again, that opportunity to create a narrative and share in a vision that people could be part of and stand beside us had to be one of honesty.
Right.
And it had to be one of authenticity in regards to not talking to people and sharing in the challenge that we have with us as titles. We had to talk to them as colleagues, as mums and dads, as friends, and really sit around the table with initially core decision makers. We reached out to people who were natural advocates in the community and who had a voice, but their values and their ethos was so strong in how they operated that we knew our voice had to be beyond ourselves as an institute and as a university.
Right.
We had to bring those people along initially that could stand beside us, that also had a voice. And it could have been one in automotive, it could have been someone who represented retail, or it could have been somebody who represented an industry where predominantly, men operate, because what we know is out of every 5 suicides, 4 of them are men.
Yes.
Aged between 40 and 60. So we sort of targeted and started working with our community in a way that initially could have a bigger domino effect. So it wasn't just our voice that was reaching out to our community.
Right. You're saying our. How much of that was you rather than our?
Okay,
I mean, you're not an academic.
No, I'm not an academic,
so, was there a sort of level of freedom that you have felt because you're not an academic that allows you or encourages you to actually participate with others in conversations that perhaps academics might be a bit more tentative of having?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably from my history and the way that I've operated, I've always understood that and believed in the me to we continuum. That whilst a challenge was being, it didn't matter where I operated, if it was cancer, supporting people with cancer or young people to transition from school, I always knew that it was something that a community, it was a collective. And that collective really had to understand the why.
Yeah.
And it always allowed my role, and I guess, looking at my own history, having more of that expertise and army stand beside me, I knew that the volume of what I was sharing would be a lot more impactful.
I mean, Boyer, as I said, was unfortunate with his tragic death, so he didn't really elaborate on the difficulties. But I know myself, even though I'm a practical farm boy from birth, I find that my academic language often presents a barrier to a conversation that one would have about topics such such sensitive issues as suicide. And so, I mean, I really applaud what you're doing, because you're not working with one collective, you're working with 2 collectives, aren't you? I mean, you're working at an interface between what Boyer referred to as the academic conversations or discourse on the one hand and the citizenry on the other. And that must at times prove quite challenging.
Yes, at times it has, because I had to learn, coming into the world of academia. I've been at the Institute now for just over 5 years. Always have had respect for research and best practice, and always really understood the importance of it when we're wanting to influence change or influence policy, but I guess there was that opportunity of relaying the importance of the nothing about us without us attitude. That if we're wanting to have a solution, we need our community. If we're looking towards developing solutions for challenges that our community are impacted by, that ability to know and understand where research fits, so that world of what happens within a university is absolutely so important. But the work we do outside our universities is actually critical.
Mm-hmm.
And that link is what continues, because our community look to our universities. We are the army of experts that, everywhere I look, I see people that are so passionate about the research areas that they're studying or that they're training or teaching in. But how do we develop these into programs that our community can access? That translation is absolutely so important, because it also creates a citizenship for our university.
Right.
It creates that aspect of what do we stand for, who are we as a university, and by us developing these programs and rolling them out where community are actually benefiting from them, we're telling people what we stand for without having to identify them in 5 values or...
But it's also very much a two-way participative process, isn't it? Because in the past, and I've been as guilty as many, I guess, in that one tends to see the world outside the academy, as it were, as a source of research objects, of things to be researched into, very rarely researched with, or even more rarely of actually listening in the first place to see what it is we really should research on in the first place. And that's what Boyer was intimating all the way through, sort of saying that this is not easy. It's because as scientists we're trained A, to look for objective truth, and B, to develop an expertise, to develop a knowledge, to then have to say, well, wait a minute, we need to put that into the context of what other people want to say first. So rather than us saying, here is a problem, let's go out and solve it, it's what's the problem? And it seems to me that suicide is an extraordinary issue in that context of...
Absolutely, yes.
Because there must be a myriad of reasons why people commit suicide.
Yes, there is, and I think the latest here for the Sunshine Coast, I think alcohol and, drugs are always going to continue to be at the top of the list in regards to contributing factors. Right. But I think that when you look at the situation around trauma and what happens, so, the latest, I think, data showcase that relationship breakdown was on the rise in regards to those reasons. And there's also the financial situations and crisis that's happening for our community. A number of different contributing factors. But I think, again, when you look at the opportunity where a university has the ability to partner, say, with what we have done with the Vulnerable Persons Unit, that's Queensland Police Service, and working directly with a group that have the latest data and research into what is happening within our community and the loss of lives in suicide. So what that does is it automatically provides us an ability to target certain industries. So when we knew that relationship breakdowns was on the rise in regards to a contributing factor towards suicide, we developed a partnership with Relationships Australia.
So how do you go about that? Do you just walk up to the front door and say, I'd like to form a partnership with you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We actually invite them. We share in the mission in such a... Because whilst it's such an unfortunate situation in which we're having to, lose so many people to suicide, the discussion can actually be one of solution, where we're actually communicating with our community in a way that provides them that we're part of a mission, and they are part of that too, that they are part of something that is somehow impacting their own community, but also in a way that they wouldn't have the tools to know what their part is in providing that ability to support someone or building that capacity of their own community to identify signs and really be able to help and respond.
Right.
So I think that ability to reach out to an industry, share a challenge with them, being a university, we have that respect. We have the backing of our experts. So the door does open, but that also opens based on the fact that they know we're standing in front of that doorway without ego. They know it's not really about us, and they know it's actually about our community. And so it's something that is beyond, they're not looking, as Mervat, this is Mervat's situation. They're looking at this as a community, and the university is knocking at our door saying, you're part of our solution. There's so much respect in that.
There's a real skill in building networks, isn't it? Which is what effectively you're doing. You're not working one-on-one or running a campaign that's in the abstract. Yeah. But it's actually building networks of people and putting people into touch with other people and organisations and so on. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing for universities to be involved in.
Yeah, it's not one that I was sort of very much aware of, and I'm still very much learning about the university, realm and how it operates. But I definitely found that the skill set that I do have does differ in certain ways. So as I'm learning so much from my amazing research colleagues, I'm also hopefully sharing the importance of that social connection.
Oh, what you have to say must be vital, obviously. I mean, otherwise it's in a vacuum, isn't it?
Yeah, well, especially when you look at the opportunity for further development and I guess the succession planning and also just that sustainability of your research. When you look at if you want to continue to bring people on and continue to obviously further develop your research, there needs to be outcomes. And those outcomes sometimes when you look at, the longitudinal studies that happen, those outcomes sometimes can take quite a while before they showcase, the importance of that. But I think, again, that ability to create impact early on in your research programs and showcase that connection and those partnerships is what funding partners are looking for. They're looking for impact and they're looking for that involvement and showcasing the ability to really, share how your research is going to not only changing lives now, but is going to change things in the future.
As I understand it, the Thomson Institute is named after some benefactors.
That's right.
And so, again, another part of your massive portfolio must be looking for potential benefactors as well.
Yeah, the amazing Roy and Nola Thomson initiated, the work and the intent behind the Thomson Institute as well, working in with the university. And they understood themselves, their story is phenomenal around the fact that, they wanted to share and give back to the community that had given them their life and their futures. And they knew the impact of mental health. But philanthropy is such a big opportunity for universities, and a lot of philanthropists look to universities just based on the fact that they know that this is our future.
Yes.
This expertise is no longer even about best practice. This is actually about next practice because things are moving so quickly. And they understand that for that to continue, that investment, in our people, in our students, in our universities, working with community is what they're looking for. Yeah. So they want to see that change. So our programs like the Alliance for Suicide Prevention is an excellent example of how that movement of universities standing beside their community through industry factors and not being biased, which what industry that is, is so important.
Fascinating. Do you ever get depressed by the sheer size of the issue?
I think hearing the stories, I am in a position where I do, hear and where people share in their stories of loss and grief. I see those conversations as opportunities for me to empower, that helps me work towards a solution. But when I'm in those moments, it's definitely one where you have to be so present, and it does. After a while, you do, you grieve with them. But especially when the situations, can be supported based on programs and processes and training that, people can.
You must have known yourself pretty well before you actually took on a role like this.
Yeah, look, I did. I had, the unfortunate loss. I lost my husband to cancer quite a number of years ago. So it was a brain tumour, and my children and I cared for him for almost 2 years during the process of the diagnosis. And again, you evolve as a person, and you evolve in a way that you understand what empathy is, and understanding the difference between sympathy and empathy, understanding the importance of what one person can do to shift or change a situation in somebody else's life, or what one person can say that can really provide that opportunity. And I had a number of those experiences because I actually, we actually were able to, support him, to even have him for those 2 years when we'd been given weeks, literally, from his diagnosis. So, and it was all because of the people and support that had stood beside us, that had the training, that understood what to say, and were amazing people in the community, standing beside each other and standing beside my family. I made a commitment to Steve that I would continue to provide that support any which way I can and give back to the community that gave us life.
Wonderful.
So
wonderful. Do you have counterparts in other universities in this country?
I know the university has the Thompson Institute itself has some really great partnerships with universities in Melbourne and in Sydney. And but the suicide prevention one is one we're expanding on. And I was just sharing this morning that had a meeting with the University of Oregon, who's really interested in what we're doing here. And they've been doing quite a bit of their research in that gatekeeper training around how do we support our community to be trained to build that safety net, and the efficacy behind that particular type of training. So we're keen to share in more of our work. We're keen to expand the work of the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, because we see that as becoming almost a peak body for a region, and each region will have its own, because no region is the same. So it's those variables, those contributors will shift and change, and we're really wanting to replicate our program and bring and encourage the hearts of those people. We want to lead by example, to help them challenge what's been happening in their communities.
And the quality of your work has been recognised by an Excellence in Community Engagement Award, as I understand it.
That's right. Yes, exactly. It's been fantastic. So that was an Australasian Award, Engagement Australia, and we won the Leadership in Engagement. So
wonderful.
It's showcasing again the importance of the university, that anchor in place system, that we are a regional university, and being a regional university, we do have the ability to connect to a community and be looking through the lens of that social, environmental even, and economical lens of recovery. What can we do around those wicked challenges our community is facing? And if we can continue to show that in action and in real time, I think universities just will continue to flourish.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on, with an optimism from a world that sometimes must seem very bleak. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I want to invite you back at some stage to find out how it's all going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for letting me share.
And thank you to all for listening, and I look forward to the next episode, when once again we can explore aspects of getting to better together. Until then, goodbye.